posting, and then you posted this, and my jaw dropped. No different than you being 2 doors down from me, effing my ass.
This didn't begin as chaos. It began in silence. Something low, controlled, and, according to insiders, something far more intentional than it appeared. Because just days after what seemed like a smooth, public apology between Kay, Michelle, and Porsha Williams, small inconsistencies started breaking through. Insiders say the tension never disappeared, it simply slipped out of view. And then, everything shifted. Private conversations didn't stay private, they started leaking into public space. Unexpected alliances began forming quietly in the background, while old rumors resurfaced with almost perfect timing. Not randomly, not casually, but exactly when they could cause the most damage. And that's when people started asking questions. Because one claim, just one, didn't feel accidental. It felt placed. Because now, it's starting to look like this wasn't a misunderstanding at all, but something that may have been unfolding behind the scenes the entire time.
How did you find out they were doing that?
I was told. I was told.
So this isn't like you assume, like you were...
At first, it didn't even register as conflict. It felt contained, controlled, almost too smooth to question. Because when Porsha Williams and Kay, Michelle finally addressed the situation, everything about it seemed calm, measured. There was an apology. There was acknowledgement. And for a brief moment, it created the illusion that whatever tension existed between them had already been settled. But insiders say that moment didn't land the way it looked. Because behind the scenes, something wasn't adding up. Reactions, small at first, began to shift in ways people couldn't quite explain. Conversations that once felt open started closing off. The tone changed. The energy changed. And what initially looked like mutual understanding slowly started to feel controlled, filtered, almost selective.
What that means is, if you know, reality TV.
Yes.
Everything has a plot and a plan.
Insiders say this is where the narrative quietly changed, because while one side believed the situation was being resolved, the other may have already been interpreting it differently, not as closure, but as positioning. And that's where things became complicated. Because according to sources, the way this situation was approached wasn't being seen as genuine by everyone involved.
The show, and then you are finally on the show, you decide this is how you're going to enter, this is how I'll make my mark, then it is what it is.
At that point, it stopped feeling like a simple misunderstanding and started to look like something much more calculated, just beneath the surface. What makes this situation harder to dismiss is how far back it may actually trace. Because insiders say this didn't begin with one moment, one comment, or one simple misunderstanding. It appears to have been building quietly over time, through interactions that, at the time, felt insignificant, but now carry a completely different weight. Sources suggest that even before anything became public, there were already signs of distance. Not loud conflict, not visible tension, but subtle misalignment. Moments where one side believed everything was genuine, while the other may have been seeing something else entirely. And that's where the timeline starts to matter. Because almost immediately after the apology, instead of things settling, the energy shifted. Conversations that once felt open started to feel calculated. Reactions became more controlled, more intentional. And according to insiders, certain topics, the kind that could quietly affect public image, began resurfacing at very specific moments. Not randomly, not accidentally. That's when the questions started forming. Not just about what was being said, but why it was being said again. And more importantly, who was gaining from it?
Yeah, because I knew what they was trying to do. They was trying to pull up rumors about something a man said about me.
From that point on, the situation didn't feel isolated anymore. It started to feel layered. Because insiders claim that what looked like random tension may have actually been part of a broader pattern. A pattern where past narratives were being reintroduced, not necessarily to resolve anything, but to reshape perception. And when perception becomes the focus, everything changes. Every reaction feels intentional, every silence feels calculated, and every interaction starts to carry more meaning than it originally did. At the same time, sources suggest that this wasn't just about external pressure. There were internal frustrations building as well, not just about what was happening, but how it was unfolding publicly. Because once a situation crosses that line, from private tension to public narrative, it becomes harder to control. And according to insiders, that's exactly what happened here. What started as a controlled situation slowly turned into something unpredictable. And by the time people began to question it, the narrative had already started moving on its own. What makes this harder to ignore is how far back it may go. Insiders say this didn't start with one moment. It built quietly over time, through interactions that once felt small, but now seem loaded with meaning. Even before anything went public, there were signs of disconnect. Not open conflict, but subtle misalignment. Moments where one side believed things were real, while the other may have seen something else entirely. Then after the apology between Kay, Michelle, and Porsha Williams, the energy shifted. Conversations became measured, reactions controlled, and certain topics resurfaced at very specific moments. That's when questions began. Not just why, but who benefited. This is where the situation stops looking like tension and starts looking like something much more deliberate. Because according to sources, what had been building quietly behind the scenes was now beginning to surface in a way that couldn't be ignored. At first, it came through small reactions, subtle comments, moments that didn't seem significant on their own, but together started to form a pattern. And then, the narrative shifted. Because instead of the situation calming down after the apology, it escalated. Publicly, insiders suggest that what appeared to be closure may have actually created space for something else to unfold. Questions started being raised, past conversations were being revisited, and certain claims, ones that had previously stayed in the background, began to reappear. Not directly, not clearly, but enough for people to start connecting the dots.
And I could have gone all like, well, how could you think? But I said, you know what? Respect how she feels. Whether she thinks I meant it, whether...
That moment, insiders say, exposed something deeper than a simple disagreement. Because while it looked like both sides were addressing the same situation, they weren't processing it the same way. On one side, there was an effort to resolve things, to acknowledge what happened, to apologize, to move forward. But on the other, there appeared to be a growing belief that something had already crossed a line. Something that couldn't be undone. And that's where the tension shifted into something heavier. Because once doubt enters a situation like this, everything changes. A conversation doesn't feel casual anymore. A reaction doesn't feel natural. Every word, every pause, starts to feel intentional. And insiders say that's exactly what began happening here. Because while the public only saw controlled exchanges, something else was forming underneath. Allegations. Not confirmed. Not directly stated. But suggested carefully, subtly. In a way that forced people to start reading between the lines. And those suggestions pointed towards something far more personal. According to sources, there were implications of a deeper connection. Something that may have happened off camera. A moment or multiple moments that quietly changed how everything else was being interpreted. And at the center of those implications was a claim that didn't stay contained. Because once the idea of a private encounter entered the conversation, it spread. Across interviews. Across timelines, across public perception. And suddenly, what once looked like routine reality TV tension started to feel like something else entirely. Something layered, something intentional, something that may have involved more than just miscommunication. Insiders even suggest that certain reactions weren't just emotional. They were triggered, as if something had already happened, and now it was being indirectly addressed. That's when the shift became impossible to ignore, because the responses started changing. At first, they were controlled, measured, carefully worded. But then, they became sharper, more direct, more emotionally charged, and increasingly difficult to dismiss. It no longer felt like two people disagreeing. It felt like two completely different versions of the same story, colliding in real time. And as the pressure built, so did the speculation. Because now the question wasn't just what was said, but what actually happened when no one was watching.
And people like, okay, so emotional. I have the biggest heart.
Yeah.
You know, and I get mean, I crash out.
That moment captured something important. Because it suggested that the reaction people were now seeing wasn't sudden. It was built. Built from frustration, built from perception, built from a belief, whether accurate or not, that something had crossed a line. And when that belief takes hold, it doesn't just stay internal. It comes out. Through tone, through words, through actions that feel less calculated and more reactive. And according to insiders, that's exactly when the situation moved into chaos. Because now, it wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what people believed had happened. And in situations like this, perception can be just as powerful as fact. From that point forward, every move carried weight, Every response added pressure, and every silence raised even more questions. At this stage, the situation is no longer being driven by events alone, it's being driven by pressure. Because according to sources, what started as tension between Porsha Williams and Kay, Michelle has now shifted into something far more personal and far more visible. The focus isn't just on what may have happened anymore, it's on how everything is being perceived. And that shift changes everything. Insiders suggest that for Porsha, the weight of constant attention has started to build. Every reaction is being analyzed. Every silence is being questioned. And in a situation like this, even doing nothing becomes a statement.
Put the phone down, we were done. Oh my God, the next day, she's tweeting saying, oh, well, what if you was to die? What did you, doubling down? I was like.
At the same time, insiders say Kay, Michelle isn't backing down. No retreat. No softening. And that only adds pressure to Porsha Williams, creating an imbalance that's becoming hard to ignore. Because what once looked composed now feels reactive. What once felt controlled now feels strained. Sources suggest this isn't just disagreement anymore, it's internal. Frustration turning into exhaustion. Pressure turning into response. And with multiple narratives unfolding at once, public, private, and speculative, everything starts blending together. A comment feels heavier. A reaction feels sharper. Even neutral moments start to feel personal. And that's what people are noticing now. Not just the conflict, but the shift in energy. From controlled to calculated to something that feels increasingly overwhelmed. And once it reaches that point, it rarely goes back. At this stage, the situation isn't just an incident anymore. It's shaping perception in real time. Because what started between Kay, Michelle, and Porsha is now affecting something bigger, image. And once public perception shifts, it doesn't easily reset. Insiders say the narrative has already moved beyond the original moment. It's no longer just about what happened, but how it looks. And right now, the optics are complicated. Because when allegations, even unconfirmed, enter the conversation, they don't stay contained. They spread, they evolve, and they start defining how every move is seen going forward.
You can't say you bringing me into a friend group and you around here, you banging on my last known ex and telling.
That moment, insiders say, brings everything back to one issue: trust. Because once trust is questioned publicly, distance forms. Not just between Kay, Michelle, and Porsha Williams, but between the story and the people watching it. Now every reaction feels uncertain. Every silence feels loaded. And that's where the real fallout begins. Not from confirmed facts, but from perception taking control. Because in situations like this, what people believe can become just as powerful as what actually happened. And the truth is, we still don't have the full picture. So the question remains, was this all perception? Or something carefully hidden?